Today's topic is optimizing therapy services in assisted living, tips to enhancing services. I am Lynda Jennings. I will be your speaker today. Just to start us off, to tell you a little bit about myself, I saw we had quite a few people from various states. I'm actually from San Antonio, Texas. It's a little chilly here today. For us, anything below 70 is cold, so we're sitting around 60 today. I'm a graduate of the University of Texas Health Science Center. I'm an occupational therapist with actually about 35 years of experience. I have primarily worked in the adult and geriatric setting. I'm a certified resident assessment coordinator, a certified dementia practitioner. I currently serve as the Vice President of Clinical Services and Compliance at the Village of Incarnate Word. Prior to that, I was the Chief Operating Officer of Touchstone Rehab, which we had oversight over 23 rehabilitation departments in skilled nursing facilities across the state of Texas. I also have a small consulting company called Jennings Therapy Solutions, where I provide support to various post-acute care providers. And I am very active in both my state and national boards. I'm the Texas OT Association state parliamentarian, and I am the state representative for the Representative Assembly for the American OT Association. In my spare time, because I do have a little bit of that, I do love traveling and spending time with my family. Now that you know a little bit about me, I'd like to know just a little bit about you. But before we do that, I had one other slide. Sorry about that. Any relevant financial and non-financial disclosures for today's presentation are noted on this slide. I'll let you take a moment to review these. So just to get started, rehab services in assisted living often blend elements of home health and skilled nursing therapeutic interventions. So I always kind of describe it as you have an assisted living facility, and the advantage is that they're working in their home. So you're working in their home, so you really get to know that client. But then you may have access to a lot of great equipment, so you can take them down to the therapy gym, unlike in home health, where you're kind of whatever you're carrying with you. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. I mean, assisted living is really great. So what we're going to talk about today is the topic is optimizing therapy services in assisted living. And we're going to examine whether, as practitioners, are we extending our focus beyond just basics? Are we just doing basic ADLs, mobility, communication, and cognition to adequately address the needs of seniors? And those needs have really changed. So we're going to introduce a few things that are really up and coming as well. I'll make some recommendations for maybe some other courses that you can attend through Summit, and hopefully add some value. So our learning objectives: examine the complexity of providing therapy services in assisted living, because there definitely are some. Explore best practices and strategies to enhance treatment interventions to meet the needs of our seniors. So assisted living communities are long-term care options that are preferred by many individuals who typically need help with everyday tasks and some home health care services. But they don't require 24-hour services like a skilled nursing facility or for extended periods of time. These communities offer a unique mix of companionship, independence, and security, and become the resident's home. And it prioritizes residents' choice, dignity, and privacy. But the one thing about assisted living is they do come in various forms. They offer different levels of care and amenities depending on the needs and the preferences of the resident. The size can vary from 25 in a setting over 100, with a wide ranges of level of care. And we're going to kind of go through that a little bit. One of the things I think is really interesting is how it varies from state to state. So the types of assisted living facilities vary depending on several factors. One is care needs, budget, lifestyle. You even have just the independent homes, locations, and then each type of assisted living offer distinct benefits, allowing seniors to find community that aligns with their personal goals and care requirements. So basically, not every assisted living facility is the same. So one of the things I like to kind of cover is licensing and certification. So states establish and enforce licensing and certification requirements for assisted living communities. A lot of people think that's under Center for Medicare or Medicaid Services. It is typically regulated by the actual state. and there are requirements depending on those states. While some federal law and regulations apply to assisted living communities, state-level regulations of assisted living and operations ensure efficient, comprehensive licensure systems because the states can effectively coordinate its full range of housing service programs available to seniors based on physical, intellect, and developmental disabilities. Every state defines assisted living facilities differently. Some are called type 1, type 2. You'll hear some called type A, type B. Assisted living resident care communities, specialty care, assisted living, resident care facilities for the elderly, and depending on your state, the definition and the requirements vary. So that is one thing that you definitely want to find out is what type of assisted living are you working in, are you supporting, because that will tell you also the amount of level of independence. Some of them have evacuation requirements. They have to be evacuated in so many minutes, and sometimes that's a good goal. Because if they want to maintain and stay in that level of care, they have to maintain that level of function. So one of the great resources I always like to put out there is that through the National Council of Assisted Living, it publishes an assisted living state regulatory review each year, and it shares the information on stage on. It shares, hold on a second. On licensure terms, the definitions, regulatory and legislative updates, facility scope of care, limitations of services, resident assessment requirement and frequency. It also talks about medication management. If that's something, some facilities will allow self-medication management, which some therapists will work on that as a goal. Staffing requirements, staff education and training requirements. I like to know this so I can know how much assistance an elder may receive or may not receive and work my plan of care around that to make sure they can hopefully stay in that setting as long as possible. So if they have to evacuate in X minutes, this may be a great goal. I can work with them. If they don't offer medication management, I can work on strategies for medication management so they do not have to go to a higher level of care. One of the things that seniors are always concerned about is how much it costs, because typically the higher level of care, the more expensive the facility is going to cost. So there are also many types of assisted living, and the biggest difference is the facility focus and the amenities and the type of services. So you have like basic assisted living facilities. They're focused on providing support with ADLs, such as bathing, dressing, medication management, and meal prep. There are some assisted livings that will have kitchenettes, some will not, and they'll be on a meal plan. They have to actually ambulate or to the actual place for food. Some will actually deliver. So the target residents in the basic ones are seniors who are relatively independent but need help with certain tasks. Some of the features, residents live in a private or semi-private apartment and have access to communal dining, housekeeping, transportation, and social activities. And there's usually 24/7 staff available or for assistance. Now, this may not be an RN necessarily. This may be an LVN, attendant. It just really depends. They will offer personal care. Sometimes they'll have what they call concierge service. And so if they need help, they can call someone. It may be for a fee. It may be all-inclusive. They typically have some type of emergency response system, wellness programs. Now, the next level would be your enhanced assisted living, and they focus on providing a little higher level of care, and it's a little closer to approaching skilled services, a little more expensive. These are seniors who need intensive assisted living with daily activity living. They may have chronic medical conditions that require close monitoring, but not full-time medical care. It's similar to basic assisting, but with more staff to resident interaction and availability of nursing staff to address higher care needs. Now, some of these also, they'll have dependents. So if they need to call for help, like a outside service, this may be an extra benefit as well. They may have assistance with mobility, medical equipment, special diets, and a little bit more complex medical management. The next level you often hear about is memory care assisted living. This is specialized, and this is caring for those who have cognitive impairments. And with these are usually considered secured units, such as they may have a form of dementia, But to be able to qualify, they do have to have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or other form of dementia. So sometimes this is a challenge, especially if you've got a husband and wife where the wife or the husband needs the memory care, but they don't, and they both cannot go into the memory care unit because of that requirement for dementia. So typically, a lot of times what we'll see is that maybe the spouse will go in, and then there'll be another level of care within that same congruent facility, and they'll remain in that facility, and they can go back and forth and visit. That was really difficult during COVID because of all the restrictions. So these, again, are targeted for seniors with memory issues who need specialized care, and often is located within a dedicated wing. And they do have 24-hour supervision. They may have a little bit higher level of skilled set. There is requirements typically of that staff. They have to have so many hours of Alzheimer-like training. And then you have other facilities that what they call a continuous care retirement community. And this is where you have someone which they call age in place. They may have, to be a continuous care retirement community, you have an independent setting. Then you typically have the multiple levels of assisted living. You may have a skilled unit. And then they may even have personal assistant services. The one great thing about this is as they need more levels of care, they can move, but they're not moving outside of that actual facility. So this is actually like the skilled nursing have full care nursing. And so that's where like I work right now, that I provide support, is it's really interesting to watch as these seniors age in place, and they can still stay within their environment, still visit with friends and family, but they're getting the care they need. And then they have other various ones out there, like your specialized care communities. We have small scale or residential care homes. They're called boarding care homes that you see that are considered under the assisted living umbrella. You have faith-based or culturally specific assisted living. These cater to residents who want to live in a community that align with their religious beliefs. You'll sometimes see that like one that is like a Jewish faith-based, and they're very good at meeting the specialty needs of someone that practices that faith, or you'll see a different faith like Catholic. Seniors prefer to live in a community who share their faith, cultural backgrounds, or values. One of the great things about this, too, is a lot of times they'll honor the different meals that you'll see. Like with Catholics during Lent, they'll have Fish Friday, and that's something that they honor because that's a specialty facility. They may offer daily worship, access to religious leaders, and religious education, and culturally tailored meals and events. So these are just some examples of what you're looking at when you're looking at assisted living. And my belief is this is super important as far as what you're doing when you're planning care, because it's person-centered. Assisted living therapy services should be based on the needs, and it meets all these. And there's also a wide range of services. So you want to find out what services does your assisted living facility offer, because this also makes a difference. They may offer personal care service. They may offer some ADL mobility assistance. If they don't offer that, then is that something that you need to work on to maintain that level of function? If they don't have housekeeping, is that something that you may work on within that therapy intervention? Again, we talked about medication management, the wellness programs. Sometimes what you'll see is we will offer some therapy services, but then they decline. And I always like to make sure I tap them into any wellness programs. If they have some exercise programs, any activities that I can get them engaged in to keep that level of function up, I want to transition my services to those wellness programs. Now, of course, most of these either offer some type of specialized PT and OT services. This may be through a traditional assisted living model where you're doing this under a Part B benefit or a managed Part B, or it could be under home health. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference. You also may also offer wound care, which although I see typically this being more on the nursing side, but occasionally I will see physical therapy provide wound care in this setting. So hopefully this kind of just gives you an idea of what to expect in assisted living. So one of the things is reimbursement. As I said, the seniors are always concerned about the finances. So in an assisted living facility, PT, OT, and speech services are usually not part of the standard room and board fees paid by the resident. There are occasionally high end that will say that's all inclusive, but most it is an add-on service. So instead, these services are typically covered through various reimbursements methods depending on the resident's individual circumstances. So some of the things that you'll see is Part B, as we discussed, private health insurance, Medicaid on occasions, very state specific, veteran benefits, and private pay. Important considerations, though, we really have to consider. Assisted living facilities often will partner with outside therapy agencies that bill Medicare or their payers directly. Residents may receive therapy services in their living quarters or in a dedicated therapy space, or both. Therapy documentation for reimbursement purposes, it has to still be well documented. It depends on the setting. Sometimes I'll see that the therapy company maintains those files. Others will have those files and they will provide copies to the facility. So that way they go in their electronic medical record. So it just really depends. But you do want to communicate. So no matter what the setting is. At the Village of Incarnate Word, we have a contracted in-house rehab provider. We also have a partnership with a home health company. But our independent residents and our assisted residents, they have the right to pick whomever they want if it's outside of those, and we can have that offered. But we also like to know who's coming in our building. So reimbursement for therapy services and assisted living can be complex, and it does vary by individual payer, state regulation, and the facility agreement with the therapy provider. So that's also important to know. So with Medicare Part B and outpatient services, this is the primary payer that we see pretty much across the board, but I will say managed care is really coming and growing. It's probably about 50% of our business now. The primary payer for PTOT speech for an assisted living, if the resident qualifies, is Part B, and it does cover what they call outpatient services. And I know when we think of outpatient, we think of coming outside facility, but you got to remember the assisted living is their home. And so this is deemed, of course, you have to be medically necessary. It has to have a physician's order. It does cover 80% of the cost, and they are responsible for 20%. So we do want to make sure that we are providing that information to the family and the resident or client, and it can be paid through a supplemental insurance, letting them know up front. I also really try to over communicate, because what typically happens in assisted living is we will get a referral. They get maybe a doctor's order from their provider, and it takes a little while. So I give them kind of expectation. They may not in skilled where you get that order, you're seeing them in the next day or two. Sometimes it might take a week. So I really try to over communicate with the client and say, okay, thank you for the order. We're going to go ahead and go through our reimbursement department. We will let you know if there's any out-of-pocket expense and what that would look like. It may take several days, but I will keep you informed. Because they want to get that therapy started. And so the more we can inform them, because the next levels they will go and they'll complain to the facility. So we want to make sure that we're communicating and anything that's covered. Now, under this, the thresholds still are in place. Coverage is subject. Now, there is no therapy cap anymore, but there is the threshold, and there are exceptions to that, but it's something that we do have to let them know. The main thing with the thresholds, you just have to be able to justify it. And I've really had no issue with that as long as we can justify the services. Now, there is home health in ALFs, and this is the traditional home health under Part A. It's billed under Part A, but to qualify, they have to be considered homebound, of course, in need of skilled and possibly intermittent nursing, and under physician care. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot more is these partnerships with home health, where what they'll do is they will bring in their home health, they bill it through their home health provider, but the therapy services, if you have an in-house provider, they contract with those therapists, so the clients will see the same therapist if they were on the independent side, the skilled side. It's those same ones they see day to day. But sometimes they bring in their outside therapists. It just depends. And the reason we're seeing more of this is because, frankly, there's a shortage of therapists. So the home health agencies a lot of times will work with that facility to actually partner with those therapists. And it's kind of a win-win because they're already familiar with the therapists that are there on a day-to-day basis. Now, on the homebound status, just so you're aware, an individual does not have to be bedridden to be considered homebound. However, leaving a home must require considerable and taxing effort. That's the key. A client will generally be considered homebound if their leaving home is medically contraindicated. The client cannot go out without supportive device such as crutches, canes, wheelchairs, walkers, cannot go out without use of special transportation. The client cannot go without assistance of another person. Maybe they suffer psychiatric illness. Maybe they refuse to leave home. We have that a lot with our vets. It would not be considered safe for them to leave home. So hopefully that helps clarify that, because a lot of people think it's strict homebound. Now, in private health insurance, these policies do vary. Sometimes there is limits on the number of sessions, so you want to be aware of that. Make sure you're using those judiciously. And the specific reimbursement rates and coverage limits will depend on the individual insurance policies. There are state-specific Medicaid programs that will cover therapy services and assisted living for low-income housing residents if the state Medicaid program includes these services. So you'll definitely want to check with your state. And then, of course, you have veterans benefits who will qualify for VA benefits, and they may receive coverage for PT and OT services. And again, you have to look at the individual VA plans. And then the last option, which we hope that we don't have to, but sometimes this does happen. I was dealing with this just yesterday, that unfortunately we were out of network. And so we were talking to a resident who really needs services, and they're going to require out-of-pocket private pay. So a lot of times the way I handle this is we'll go ahead and let them know how much the evaluation costs. Typically I can encourage them to do the evaluation, and then I can make recommendations and say, you know, if we do 3 sessions, this is what it would cost. And then we could do a week to week just to make sure that you're okay with that. So it just really depends. But you do want to make sure that you talk with that assisted living facility to figure out who bills that resident directly or through their, insurance. So typically that will go on their bill for therapy services. You'll want them to sign the appropriate paperwork as well. So some of the influences that depend on the delivery of therapy services in an assisted living, these factors span across resident needs, facility capabilities, staffing, and other external influences. So some of the demographics that I look at from a resident health and demographic is age and physical health. Residents in assisted living often have a range of physical conditions from mobility limitations to chronic pain, which can shape the type of therapies that you will provide. Also, cognitive impairments. Conditions like dementia or Alzheimer's disease significantly impact on how therapy services are going to be delivered. Therapists are going to have to adapt communication and intervention to meet cognitive needs. And then we can't forget about emotional and mental health needs. There is a lot of individuals that have severe anxiety, depression, and social isolation that can affect therapy participation. I've had referrals that patients that really need services, but they don't want to leave the room. They're very anxious. And so I have to tailor my therapy around that. They have to address both the physical and the mental well-being. The other thing is looking at cultural and personal preferences. Looking at what their individual backgrounds are, their cultural norms can influence goals and engagement. We are a faith-based facility where I am at. We do have daily mass. We are, any denomination we're accepting, but it is primarily Catholic. So we do have daily mass, and a lot of times that's something that's very important. We have sisters that retire there. So working with them on making sure that they're still able to do everything. We also have a TV that, they can turn a channel if they're unable to make their daily masses, if they would like to do that, if they can't go outside of their facility. So really a lot of education. It does require a therapist to tailor their approach accordingly. You have to really do that deep dive, kind of that Q&A when you're first asking. It's not just about the range of motion and about, can they do their ADLs? And their mobility. It's all encompassing. So the ability and the expertise of the therapist specializing in geriatric care. And having that extra, that's one of the reasons I got my dementia practitioner certification, because I felt it was an area of opportunity for me. Looking at the ratios. So one of the things that to me is very interesting in assisted living is, depending on that level, you may only have one person for maybe 30 residents. And so it's not like skilled, but they can call for help. So really figuring out what those needs are going to be during the daytime and the evening. So depending on that ratio. Looking at what facility resources are out there. So one of the things in our assisted living is we do have, of course, multiple therapy gyms, which we can do therapy in, but we also have a pretty robust wellness program, which is another gym that they can continue their services on. So we look at the availability of specialized equipment. We also look at if they need equipment. Sometimes when they come to assisted living, I always think it's very interesting. And we have a very large campus. So we will have someone that we admitted and they use no assistive devices. But because of how large of a campus we are, and they're going to and from the dining room, the first thing most of our residents will need and would like training on is some type of walker, or the nanny walkers is what I call them, with which they have the seats or they have things. And the main reason is because they want something to be able to carry a meal or to go to the different activities. And it's always interesting when we have holiday functions, because it's kind of a park and, seat. They kind of walk and dine, and you've got 50, 60 walkers and they all look alike. So now they've all become decorating, and they personalize them. So that way, when they leave that, they're getting their personal walker. We also look at, do you have a treadmill or an exercise bands or cognitive therapy tools, anything that can impact the variety and what you can do for therapy services. Now, there may be limited space for conducting therapy sessions. So that's the other thing. You have to look at your assisted living and see what they have and what's within that scope. If they need work because they're assisted living, but they go out to dinner with their family, using the actual campus to show them how to walk up and down steps, because they want to be able to go outside of their community. And then access to technology. And we're going to talk briefly about this. Is one thing that has been up and coming and changing over the past couple of years, and especially with COVID, is technology. We now have telehealth platforms, we have virtual reality tools, and we have mobile therapy apps that can enhance service delivery, especially for remote assessments or cognitive therapy exercises. I do a whole nother presentation with Summit on technology with aging. And it's something that I feel that in assisted living, we really need to encourage our seniors to tap into those resources. A lot of times we think that we're not able and they're not able, but they are. So the other influences when you're looking at an assisted living is that the delivery of therapies is that regulation and policy. Medicare, Medicaid, the structure of Medicare and Medicaid coverage influences what therapy services are available. It also tells you how much therapy, how much time sometimes, the type, the frequency, and the duration of therapy. You may only be given a very limited time. So using that time as best as you can to introduce them to what else is out there is usually the way I manage that. Regulation on staffing levels, care standards, and certification requirements will vary depending on the assisted livings that you work in. And then each facility may have its own guidelines for therapy, influenced by budget constraints or corporate policies, potentially impacting the availability or the scope of services. So when you look at financial considerations, of course, cost is always a concern. Therapy services can be expensive, and residents or family members may face financial challenges in accessing all recommended services. This can lead to underutilization of therapy. So the type of therapies covered by insurance and reimbursement rates influence the scope of services. If specific therapy is not covered, residents may opt out, even if it could be beneficial. So that's the one thing that's just unfortunately the reality, and we're seeing it's getting tighter and tighter. Resident motivation and participation. This is also huge. Residents' willingness and ability to participate in therapy sessions significantly affect outcomes. I really like to, if there is a family member that is, visiting quite often, anything that I can do from a home evaluation or a home therapy program or anything that I can defer to them that's not as skilled, that you can say, okay, hey, you could work on this home exercise program. Here's a TheraBand, transition over, so I can spend my time on the more skilled aspects, knowing that resources are typically limited. Family members will often play a key role encouraging or arranging therapy for their loved one. But there's all those family members that are disengaged and they just expect therapy to take that on. Peer interaction. One of the things that has been really wonderful in the setting that I'm in is the friendships that are developed and the encouragement among fellow peers. And this can play a positive role in therapy, as residents may encourage each other during therapy sessions. Now, one thing that I didn't see as often in assisted living was any group therapy sessions. But if you are that in-house provider, sometimes you can network with, maybe you have 2 clients that are on assisted living that you can bring together and improving their motivation and outcomes. So don't always assume that assisted living therapy has to all be one-on-one and individual. Now, of course, you have to bill it appropriately, but it is a potential way of delivering services. The other thing that also influences delivery of services is looking at communication among caregivers. So assisted living individuals may have caregivers part-time, full-time, depending on the resources, and effective communication between therapy and those caregivers is crucial. Poor communication can result in disjointed care and hinder therapy progress. Of course, accurate documentation is a given, and sometimes there's time constraints. Therapists may have limited time to work with each resident due to caseload demands. So I think this is one of the biggest challenges I see in assisted living, is because in skilled nursing, you can go see them, and if they say, hey, I've got another appointment, you can kind of come back and forth. Assisted living, a lot of times you are running all over a campus. You may not even be there on a regular basis. So if they're not able to participate right at that time that you've scheduled, then you can't always do a makeup session. So really working with them as best on schedules. And I know that's kind of a bad word in therapy world because schedules are sometimes different, but that's usually the best way to get some consistency. Residents may have multiple medical appointments, so having a process in the system to confirm that. I've actually seen therapists now use, because a lot of seniors now have smartphones, and they will send the evening before to all their clients. They'll have a system just confirming our, appointment tomorrow at 9:00 and get a confirmation. There's actually even some companies that have, programs that actually can do that, because this will reduce those conflicts and interfere with therapy schedules and reduce consistency in treatment, because that's frustrating. You want to get in there, get your therapy, and you don't want cancellations as well. So the other thing is looking at psychological and emotional factors. Depression and loneliness is huge in this setting. Sometimes you are their one thing that they're looking forward to. Sometimes you're not. Mental health issues like depression often linked to isolation or loss of independence. So this is something, when you're putting your plan together, is how you can engage them with the outside world, especially if there's someone that does not want to participate in things outside of their room. This can reduce motivation, but I really believe that therapy has a role in this, and that we can look at this through, if it is, Facebook, that they engage that. There's the setting up the frames that they can have pictures sent from their family members, something that is engaging them outside of just watching TV or a radio. And then some, they may be resistant to change, especially if they see it as a sign of, weakness or loss of autonomy. My father-in-law, he is still at home with my mother-in-law, fought to not use a cane. His wife uses a cane, but he did not want to use a cane. And finally, we've convinced him of that after he had a few falls, because he recognized that if he didn't use the cane, that he wasn't going to be as independent. So overcoming these resistance, but it's also building that rapport to improve that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the individual therapies and their roles. I know we've got a little bit from all the different disciplines. So physical therapy and assisted living. So what do we do in assisted living? That's a little different. Some of it's similar. Like I said, we're kind of a cross between SNF and home health. In an assisted living, we see a range of therapeutic activities aimed at improving mobility, strength, and balance. Overall physical function in the elderly resident. Now, some of the things that we typically see, of course, you have a licensed PT that'll conduct the initial assessment to evaluate them, to determine what the needs are. Depending on the setting, there's some reimbursement changes. I will see that sometimes they'll delegate it to an assistant. There is supervision guidelines. It varies by state, but you do have those regulations. You want to be based on whatever you collected as far as that. That's not any different than anything else. They collaborate with the resident and possibly the family member or the caregiver to set realistic goals. A lot of times what I see when we get referrals for physical therapy is maybe they sustained a fall, or maybe they're getting weak and they're not able to make it to the dining room. Maybe they're not able to do some of their activities. And that's usually where we get the call. These goals may include walking ability, reducing pain. That's another thing that we'll see quite a bit, working on flexibility, and just enhancing that overall independence. So looking at customizing that treatment, the therapist will design, of course, a personalized plan of care. And that plan will tailor to whatever meets those goals. Now, this may include some exercises, stretches, manual therapy techniques, deciding if they need a type of assistive device, kind of like what I talked about with my father-in-law, and any modalities such as maybe heat or cold therapies that they may need. So looking at exercise programs, we want to engage them in therapeutic activities. But again, I really try to make sure that if there's any that are offered within the facility, like at the Village of Incarnate Word, we have this gym that is for our independent residents and our assisted living residents. So rather than just taking them to the therapy gym, where when they're done with therapy, we're done with that and they don't have access to it, part of my therapy would be to take them to that gym and work with our wellness coordinator and say, okay, this is what you can do to continue that service. So that's part of that plan. Looking at exercise performed individually or in group, working with our activities director, depending on that facility setup and resident preference. Addressing any mobility issues that they have, working on transfer techniques. And of course, I like to do, and this might be PT or OT, it kind of varies who's got the expertise. I like to do kind of an in-room assessment, like a home assessment, but for in-room, and looking at the setup of their room and how we can improve that from a safety perspective. Now, one of the other main concerns, like we talked about, was fall prevention. One of the things that we're very blessed at is we have a tool called VirtueSense that we periodically do VirtueSense test on our seniors, and a lot of times we'll get referrals from that. Falls are a significant concern for older adults, so physical therapists will often incorporate fall prevention techniques within that treatment plan. And then, of course, collaborating with other healthcare professionals. So occupational therapists and assisted living focus on helping residents maintain or regain independence in their daily activity living, known as occupations. And some of the things that we will look at is the occupation will assess the resident's living environment with the assisted living to identify any barriers or challenges that may hinder their independence. They may recommend modifications or adapt equipment to their environment safety and make it more accessible. Also look at energy conservation techniques or adaptive activities to accommodate. Training in additional ADLs and IADLs. A lot of these assisted living do have showers, so a lot of times I'm working with them on that because they don't have a caregiver that's going to provide that service. And then we may incorporate some cognition, such as dementia or mild cognitive impairments, that may provide some additional services. So, and for my speech therapist in assisted living, now, unfortunately, I don't see as much speech therapy as I think could our residents benefit from. I do think it's a need in our assisted living for evaluating and treating communication and swallowing disorders. Most common, I see it for referred for swallowing, but not to say that we would not see that for cognitive. So again, the speech therapist is going to provide the different assessments, and we will look at oral care hygiene. They'll provide education and training to residents and caregivers on proper oral care, hygiene, oral hygiene, dysphagia, aspiration, voice disorders, any type of progressive monitoring and follow-up, collaborate with the interdisciplinary team. They will closely work with the other members of the healthcare team to include the physician, of course, the OT and PT, to make any other recommendations on the independence of our independence for our seniors. So, how do we enhance therapy services in assisted living? It requires a combination of improving the quality and accessibility of services and optimizing staff performance and creating a therapeutic environment that supports resident well-being. Some of it is to tailor the programs, personalize the treatments, develop individualized treatment plans based on the comprehensive assessment, focus on function. I can't stress that enough. Emphasize therapy goals that improve their daily functions, such as mobility, strength, balance, cognitive, but in that environment. Incorporating technology. I'm a strong believer in that. There is implementing, we're seeing telehealth, we're seeing remote monitoring now. Sometimes we're the ones introducing that. Like I said, I provided another training on how technology can enhance independence on older adults, and it expands on a lot of the tools out there. Assistive devices, incorporating any type of mobility aids, and then creating dedicated therapy space, specialized equipment, and therapy gardens. That's another great tool to use for enhanced programs. So the other thing that I like to look at is integrating group therapy and social engagement. And I do think I see assisted living as a lot more one-on-one, but I think if you can agree and organize group therapy programs for residents to engage with their peers while working on physical and cognitive, you will see that carryover that you don't necessarily see. Partner with my either recreational therapist, it just depends on the assisted living, what services they have, or their activity directors, incorporating funds. Sometimes I will take my assisted living resident to that activity and let them have their therapy session while we're participating in that, and then provide guidance. Of course, encouraging their family participant, and then providing the family with regular updates on their loved one's progress, and encouraging feedback to ensure therapy services are in line with what that client needs and their evolving services. I also like to focus on preventative care. Having fall prevention programs, talk a little bit about specialty clinics, wellness fitness programs, and of course, flexible scheduling. So what are specialty clinics? So specialty clinics are things that you may offer, and not every facility offers it, but senior wellness and fitness clinics. Sometimes these will be offered free of charge, that you'll just have a clinic, you'll offer preventative care, maintaining mobility, balance. You might do some assisted living. I always we'll check the canes or make sure their brakes are locking properly, and just do a little clinic for them, but it may make a referral. And I did see your question, and I will answer it in just a second. So On fall prevention, a fall prevention clinic is a specialized facility or program designed to help older adults individualize fear of risk of falling. And so what we have in a fall clinic is we usually bring out the virtue sense. We have screens. There is no cost to them, but then we will make a recommendation for a referral. So one of the questions that came out was, I didn't think Medicare Part B covers group therapy. Medicare Part B, there is no such thing as concurrent in Part B. If you have two people together, it is considered group therapy. The reason that you don't see a lot of group therapy, and I'll be real honest, it doesn't pay great. It's a very small amount, and you might do a 30-minute group and you're getting, I hate to say peanuts, but you're getting very much peanuts. I personally think I wouldn't do group therapy session for every single session, but I think an occasional group session to me makes sense. And sometimes with my clients that have got really limited amounts of funds, that's a way to extend that as well, as if I can do a group. But there is no such thing as concurrent in Part B services. As long as if you took two people together, it is group therapy. But I will say most therapy providers out there, if you're with a contract company, they will say, no, Part B bad, because it just doesn't reimburse that well. So they prefer one-on-one. But yes, you can do group therapy in Part B, but you do have to bill it appropriately. So just to make sure I answer that question. So we talked a little bit about the fall prevention clinic. It's a specialized clinic that is designed to help older adults. And we offer assessment of fall risk. We'll offer like exercise program, balance and gait. You don't necessarily have to have a virtue sense. You can use a lot of the different tools that are out there to create a fall clinic. But it's definitely one of my clinics. We offer it probably at least once a quarter. We kind of move the location. We get people to sign up. And it's probably one of our most popular specialty clinics. Sometimes we'll also offer what they call assistive, adaptive equipment. Bring me your walker, your canes. I can't help it when I walk through our facility and I see someone walking with a cane that's about as tall as they are. And I'm like, it's not properly. They picked it up at the local pharmacy. So it's just basically focused on training residents to use adaptive equipment, walkers and wheelchairs, and making sure that they're fitted appropriately, making some basic adjustments. You are not really getting involved, but it's just having that relationship, that rapport. They may ask you some additional questions, and then that might be a great opportunity to say, you know what, maybe you need to contact your physician for an order and we'd be happy to see you. But it's really that just some basic findings, so it may refer you for additional services. Technology for senior clinic. This is something that's kind of new. I haven't done this a lot, but it's something that we're seeing more, where you may just be out there just to introduce it. We have what they call it's a educational series that we do in the evenings, and we do it usually once a month, and we have various topics, and this topic may be technology for seniors, and our assisted living and our independent residents may come to these informational things, and we may have demonstrations of the different devices that are out there, and they may want more information. So that is something that we like to kind of offer just to make them aware of it. The other thing, to kind of keep your presence in an assisted living, because so much of what I see for assisted living is it's therapists that are driving up, they come, they leave, and they're not part of the community. And to get those referrals in there, if you're part of that community, then they're more likely to reach out to you when they do need something. So some things that I've seen that's been successful is developing a calendar of events. And it doesn't have to be a huge topic, long topic, but it might be a 5-10 minute, no more than 15 minutes. And you present maybe at a resident council meeting or a resident information meeting. A lot of times they have this, and you just talk about a topic. I try to tie it with whatever's happening. I might talk about tech and you, in January. It's February's American Heart Month, and I give them a little information. So these are just some ideas that you can incorporate in your facility. So maybe you'll find those interesting. Now, with anything, there's always challenges with assisted living and with any setting. So with some, of course, we've got cognitive impairments. We've got residents that may have cognitive impairments, such as dementia, and it can make communication, comprehension, and participation in therapy more difficult. One of the big challenges I have too is complaints, where we provided the services, but the family calls and says that their mom said they didn't get their therapy. So, to me, it's just a quick, easy little fix. What I do is I just have a little notebook at the door, and, I'll put a little note to the family, said, hey, stop by, and provided mom with X and X, and call me if you have any questions. So that way, when they do stop by, I've got it dated, and everything there, and they can give me a call if they have more questions. And that has been pretty much the solution that I've had, because that way you physically were there and your signature was there, and it's a little bit easier to validate it. Physical limitations, some of them don't, they may have mobility issues, pain, other age-related. Emotional challenges. Some residents may experience depression, like we said, anxiety or grief. Sometimes in assisted living, because of depression and anxiety, you go knock on that door and they're scared. They maybe don't remember that you're coming for therapy, and they think you're a stranger and they don't want to enter. So sometimes, it's a matter of working with the family, the caregiver, or inviting them to come outside of that assisted living door and have therapy outside of that room in the therapy area. So I have to look at it individually. And multiple health conditions. That's always a challenge, looking at all the comorbidities. We have to look at it holistically. And I will stick around to answer questions, but I want to make sure I get through these. So I do see a couple popping up. Of course, side effects. Sometimes I've seen where there are alertness and energy levels. So sometimes I will work with whoever is over that assisted living and talk with them about their medication to find out, because I'll go all gun-ho ready to go and they're down taking a nap, because they had a certain medication that made them a little groggy. Facility, family dynamics, that's a challenge no matter what settings you work in. We talked about the resources, and then sometimes staff turnover. Best practices. So the best practices are collaborating. Working in that assisted living allows the therapist to collaborate with a range of healthcare providers. I like to really get to know everybody that's within that setting. Keep your interventions person care centered. This opportunity to develop personalized care plans. That's the thing that's great about assisted living. Therapy can really improve quality of life by promoting physical mobility, emotional well-being. The more physical engaged you are, the more you're going to be, in the future, your cognition, your physical, everything. I think we all know this. And then sometimes family members often visit, and I don't let that stop me. I will just, hey, I have an appointment if I need to engage them with it. And sometimes they'll go for it. Some just say, no, we really don't want you to be here this time. But if I can, I'll just have them, hey, come with me, come to the gym, see what mom's doing. I don't want that to stop things. And build relationships. I'm a big believer in building the relationships with with the group that you're at, because that way, that's going to help you tenfold. Flexible interventions. Therapists can be creative and flexible. One of the questions, do you have any resources on therapy activity ideas? I like to use a lot of the activity resource books. I don't think I put that in one of my resources, but I take a page out of my activity director book, because a lot of those are the things that they engage, and I can incorporate that into my therapy. Like I said, we talked a little group therapy. Again, it's not the primary thing by any means, but I do want to engage them. And sometimes I want to remind you, is if you attend a group setting and it's not someone that is getting therapy, they just happen to physically be there, that's not group therapy. You're just doing your therapy in an individual set. You're doing your individual therapy in a setting with other individuals. Hope that made sense. Being diverse with what they need, opportunities to culturally tailor those therapeutic approaches. I think that's something that's really important. We have a real wide diversity, and so we try to incorporate that in. And then to me is building trust and rapport, using person-centered approaches. Communication is key. They're just kind of a summary. Be flexible, creative, promote social engagement, focus on function. I can't stress that enough. So hopefully, if you took one thing, I did my job. I want to, again, I will stay on for a little bit. Thank you again for attending this lunch learn. I hope you learned a little bit about yourself and anything about this setting that maybe you could take back and just look at it a little differently. There are some additional resources that I provided. That book on the different regulations and the state reviews are there. Those links are live in your resources. If you have any questions, like I said, I'm available. We're right at the top of the hour. I know a lot of you are going straight back to work, but hopefully you found the information helpful, and thank you for attending today.